Listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
And we do thank you for listening to America's Web Radio, and it's time for Do Facts Matter with Professor Robert D'Agostino, and he's caught in a little bit of traffic, but will be here very shortly, and I can talk about Do Facts Matter. They certainly don't matter to Democrats. In fact, Joe Biden wouldn't know a fact and the truth if it hit him upside the head, as he has proven over and over again. And others that seem to, it's like we had one of our doctors point out that Biden is a communist. No ifs, ands, and buts about it, as is AOC and many of the Democrats that are pushing us towards socialism, when in fact socialism, as I was taught when I was in junior high school and high school, is one step away from communism and fascism and Marxism. So any of the isms start out with socialism. If you want a prime example, you should listen to Let's Talk Venezuelan yesterday, when Josie and Kat were talking about the fact that it started out, Venezuela was one of the richest countries in the world, as a matter of fact, capitalist country, producing a lot of oil and doing very well. Then the socialists took over, and then they converted that into the fact that right now Venezuela is a communist country from top to bottom. And this is what we're going towards, and folks, you better wake up and realize that's exactly what we're going towards. And we've got to stop it. I don't want to live under communism, nor do I want my kids or my grandson to live under communism. But that's where we're headed, and there's nothing good about it. As Dr. Scheer said on the Doctor's Lounge the other day, one of the first things that communism take over is health care. And look at what's happening with health care. I've had family members recently, within the last few months, that it's just deplorable. And if you go to the hospital, I'm begging you, take somebody with you that knows what they're doing and is able to understand and will question. And, who is this doctor that's supposedly coming in to treat you? It's probably, in most cases, a hospitalist. That is one of the worst things that's happened to our medical system ever. Hospitalist. What is that? That's a hired gun of the hospital that calls himself a doctor. Well, legally he has to be a doctor, but he doesn't give two hoots in hell about you or your family member or whoever is in the bed that you're with. They've never seen him before, and chances are they'll come in with their narcissistic attitude that they know everything and say this, and this, and then tomorrow you'll have another one doing it. You don't get the same hospitalist day in and day out. You're lucky to get the same nurse day in and day out. And I don't know what it's coming to, but it's just absolutely crazy, and we've got to do something about it, folks. You've got to say no. And speak of the man himself, we've got Professor D'Agostino just walked in the office. Robert, I was talking about hospitalists and how the communists are taking over, as the doctor said in the Doctor's Lounge the other day, they're taking over our medical system. And China is right at the center of it. They've got us by the short hairs because of the amount of manufacturing they do for the big pharmas. So with that, howdy.
Thank you, Dave. Sorry I'm running a little late. One reason I'm running a little late is I was so engrossed in an article that I'm going to talk a little bit about in a minute, written by a professor at Cornell University. But before I get to that article, because it fits right in with what I'm going to discuss today, which is about as important as anything I've said. We are involved right now in this country in what can only be called a Marxist-Leninist insurrection. Marxist-Leninist insurrection. It's Marxist because it's pits group against group. Now, traditional Marxism, of course, was class against class. The proletariat class against the bourgeoisie and what have you, the aristocracy. But now it's identity politics. The Democrat Party is pushing this cultural Marxism, group against group, gender against gender, sex against sex. And of course, since for the Democrats, just finding everybody's a victim, they got to find an oppressor, and the oppressor is white males. Well, I should say probably white heterosexual males, and particularly those who believe Jewish or Christian beliefs, real beliefs. And in what sense is it Leninist? And this is important because this idea that what's going on in this country today is somehow not coordinated, or there's no planning behind it, is nonsense. Obviously, there's a lot of what happens which is not directly directed, but the strategy is directed. The rioting is encouraged. And yes, we always talk about Antifa and their organizers. And you can, by the way, if you look at these riots, I'm not calling them protests. They're riots, not protests. Let's call them what they are. Protests. The Floyd, the murder of George Floyd was a pretext. That the left has been waiting for to set off what they intend to do, which is to overthrow this country, the constitutional republic, and that is centralized and being coordinated by Barack Obama and his people. Organizing for America. Organizing for America has over 30,000 members across the country. It is quite well funded by the left-wing billionaires, George Soros among them. They have big money and they know how to organize, and they hand this money out and pay people. So it's directed and funded insofar as it's directed. Now, I'm not saying they direct every single thing that occurs, but I'm saying that the encouragement of the rioting, and even the encouragement of the looting, is by professional organizers. Yes, professional organizers, and they are professional revolutionaries, as Lenin would have or Stalin would have said. And so the Organizing for America, those people who work for them, and again, Obama has a house in Washington, D.C., and they have offices of Organizing for America right there being run out of his residence in Washington, D.C. They're what Lenin would have called the vanguard. The movement for the dictatorship of the proletariat had a vanguard. The proletariat couldn't be trusted. There had to be an intellectual vanguard, the intelligentsia. And remember what George Orwell said about the intellectuals. He said, there are some things so absurd, some ideas so absurd that only an intellectual would believe them. And that's exactly what's happened. So we now have the vanguard, the Leninist vanguard, Organizing for America, and they are coordinating, of course, with the paramilitary wing, which is, of course, the Antifa and the radical wing of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I'll talk. And I know if you say nasty things or negative things, not even nasty. If you tell the truth about the Black Lives Matter organization, you risk your job. I've just risked my job. I'm sure I not really risked my job. First of all, I'm too old. So they figure they're going to get rid of me soon anyway. And secondly, I am tenured. And thirdly, Atlanta's John Marshall Law School has, in fact, adopted the University of Georgia resolution on free speech. So we not only have our contracts, we have a free speech resolution, and I have no reason to believe Atlanta's John Marshall Law School would not uphold the principles for which it has voted for and adopted. But let's go back to this here. We have now Marx. It's Marxist in the sense that it's group against group. And they're always victim groups. And Marxism was class. And now it's identity politics. Blacks against whites, homosexuals against heterosexuals, women against men. Whatever the left can do to create a victim class, or people who think they're victims, they're doing that. It's part of the strategy. You have to get people to lose complete faith in the system as it is. And the left has worked on that for a long time, and it looks like they're succeeding because they have the Marxist-Leninist movement totally dominates the Democrat Party. And if the polls are right, if they're anywhere near right, there'll be a gigantic Democrat landslide in November. They will pick up more House seats. They will pick up the Senate, and they will win the presidency by a Joe. It's hard to say. Biden. Say to me, oh no, no one will elect Biden. No one can support Biden. He's a corrupt, gaffe-prone liar suffering from cognitive decline. And I tell you, that's perfect. That's exactly what they want. Someone as weak as can be. The man is weak and unprincipled and corrupt. It's a perfect front for the left. And you say, oh my goodness, merit. No. The left is not interested in merit. Never have been. The left take a page out of Stalin's book. Let's go back to Stalin. And Lenin died in, I think, 1924. So the question was, who was going to be the new leader of the Soviet Union? And of course, there was Stalin and there was Trotsky, the brilliant Trotsky, the theoretician Trotsky. Now, he was a murderer. He was instrumental in forming the Chekha, the secret police in the Soviet Union. But he was also the most brilliant, but he lost. How did Stalin win? Because Stalin understood how to control the bureaucracy, that the country had to be run by a bureaucracy. And Stalin purposely made sure it was an incompetent bureaucracy. People who had no reason by merit to be in the positions of authority they were in. That was Stalin's whole idea. If you promoted people who knew they didn't belong in positions of power and making whatever money they were making, they were completely loyal to Stalin because they knew they didn't belong there. What if the bureaucracy in Russia, in the Soviet Union in the early days, was chosen on merit? Well, they may not have had the famine. They may not have had a civil war. They may not have had a lot of things that went wrong. The incompetence in the production. I mean, it took years and years for Russia, the Soviet Union, to catch up to the productivity of Russia in 1913. Because why? And the only reason they even caught up is because Lenin, realizing that socialism had wrecked the farms, started the new economic policy, which was a return to free market, at least in the farm sector. But that's another story for another day. I want to get back to where I was, that Stalin intentionally put people who didn't belong there in positions of power and positions to make money and to exercise authority. And the people who he put there knew darn well they didn't belong there. But who put them there? Stalin. So he had complete loyalty from the bureaucracy. So when the time came to control the Soviet Union after Lenin's death, there was Stalin with control of the bureaucracy. And he was able to exiled Trotsky and then had him murdered in Mexico, and he was able to execute his fellow revolutionaries. Bukharin and the rest of them were shot because they were, why? Because they weren't true believers? Oh, they were. Because they got where they got through merit. Sure, they didn't believe, that they believed in strange things, and they were wrong about history and about society, but they were very smart, and they had some ability. They had to go. And that's what's happening now. Go back to Biden. What better person? He believes in nothing except winning an election. He's corrupt. He always has been. We used to call him in Delaware when he was a senator. He was owned by Wilmington Trust, the big bank in Delaware.
Robert, let's stop for a second. Okay, let's assume Biden were to win.
Yes.
Which I don't think will happen, but always a possibility. So then you got Biden that's too dumb to get in out of the rain. You've got AOC. You've got the Clintons, and you've got Obama. Who's going to be the power of the Democrats? It couldn't be Biden. He hadn't got the brains to do it.
No, or the beliefs. Well, it won't be the Clintons. The Clintons are a criminal couple. They're mostly interested in stealing your money. We're more interested in people stealing our lives. That gives it back to Obama. And that means the real interesting thing is, what are they going to do about the VP nomination? Because let's assume that Biden wins. He obviously can't govern. So the question is, who's going to govern? Well, when the Obama administration, the most influential person governing was a person named Valerie Jarrett. So the question is, will she come back into power? And the answer is yes. She works for the Organizing for America. She has an office in the residence of the Obamas in Washington. So she'll be back in there. I think there'll be a lot of appointments of high-level leftists. Look, Obama, in a sense, Obama was the most corrupt president in American history, not because he stole money, but because he politicized and corrupted the entire bureaucracy. He politicized the FBI. He politicized the CIA. He abused the power of the government against his enemies, which included Trump in the end. And look, they've carried on a war against Trump for 3.5 years now. And they've gotten nowhere in terms of the facts, but the facts don't matter. That's what why my show is called The Facts Matter. No, they don't. And so, but you tell enough lies in a row, and you got Goebbels, in Germany. People start believing them. And certainly they've surrounded Trump with a very negative atmosphere, because he plays into that sometimes. But I ask my left-wing colleagues, just exactly what law did Trump break, and they can't name it. Oh, Trump is a crook. He's a terrible. He's a tyrant. I said, what's your evidence? They have none, and they'll never have any. But it doesn't make any difference. Facts don't matter. I picked up to go back to the analogy to Lenin and Stalin and the Marxist-Leninist way of ruling things. Professor at Cornell named William A. Jacobson, who has been after him for a while. The cancel culture has been after him for a while. And his post is called Cornell University Takes a Major Step Towards Compulsory Racial Activism for Faculty and Students. Notice the word compulsory. What did Stalin do? He had his political commissars in every factory, in every military unit, and at least every week, and sometimes more often, there'd be a political indoctrination course. And people went voluntarily to the political indoctrination speech, except for the fact that it wasn't voluntary. If you didn't go, you were a counter-revolutionary. If you didn't participate and applaud, you were a counter-revolutionary. And that was the end of your career, maybe even your life, and certainly the Gulag awaited you. The proposed initiative by this And by the way, come to think of it, this Pollock she's the new president of she's the president of Cornell. How do these people get into power? It's the same philosophy that drove Stalin to appoint mediocrities or less to positions of power and authority. The left understands very much. So if someone becomes in the major universities, the deans, especially in the social sciences, the presidents, the provosts, the vice presidents, when they hire them, the faculty has to review the hiring, generally speaking, and they always will opt for a candidate that they feel they can manipulate. Weakness. Anyone who shows strength is not going to get a job at these major universities in the high-ranking administrative positions. They're not going to get a position. Only maybe if they get into serious financial trouble, they'll bring in somebody. It's like what happens in this country. A state gets in financial trouble, it gets all messed up, and the people go and elect a Republican governor. As soon as the Republican governor straightens it out, they kick him out and put in a Democrat promising free stuff. So you say to me, so why do people like places like Vermont and Maryland and Massachusetts all have Republican governors? To clean up messes. And once they're cleaned up, out they go. And that's why I'm not as optimistic as my producer here, Dave, about the next election. I'm very much fear that it'll be a Democrat sweep, and that'll be the last, as my son pointed out, that'll be the last free election we've ever had here in this country. If the Democrats take the House, the Senate, and the presidency, it's over, because they will move towards an immediate amnesty for up to 22 million illegals, of which 8 or 9 million are voters, and they will always vote Democrat. And there'll be no chance for any Republican to ever win again. Plus, of course, the Democrats are experts on vote fraud. I'll tell you a story about that after I finish this. But anyway, here is what the proposal from the president of Cornell. This is from her proposal, I'm quoting. Educational requirements, this is a mandatory, proposed initiatives, this is a mandatory, quote, educational requirement on racism, bias, and equity for all Cornell students. A new anti-racism center, an institution-wide themed semester focused on issues of racism, unquote. And of course, it also includes a mandatory faculty participation in programming regarding, quote, race, racism, and colonialism in the United States, unquote. Now, what's the physics professor want to go there for? Why don't you leave him alone so he can contemplate the cosmos and maybe figure out what dark energy is or dark matter? They don't. Two big puzzles in physics today. What's dark energy? What's dark matter? They don't know. So let them continue that research. How about the biology professors, medical professors? Oh, but most institutions, major institutions, are dominated by the social sciences, by the professor of gender studies, the professor who's giving courses in comic books, the professor who's out there, African American studies, unserious stuff. They talk nothing about race. All they talk about is racism. So you have, and not to mention deans, or associate deans, I should say, for diversity and inclusion. The most notorious one out in California, of course, in one of the branches of the University of California, who's making $400,000 a year to be the Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion. I can't tell you how many HR positions in various universities and academic institutions, colleges, universities, have these kinds of Associate Deans. And obviously, they're people mostly of rather modest intellectual achievement. Anyway, this Professor Jacobson, he points out what's going on. So what's happened now is the focus on skin color. Martin Luther King said, Dr. Martin Luther King said, we don't want to consider skin color. We want to consider merit. We want to consider the character. It's even more important than merit sometimes in terms of ability to do something, but the character of people's hearts. Now, of course, is absolutely obsessive. We've gone way back the other way. The focus on skin color is a requirement. And of course, that underlies activism. So as Professor Jacobson points out, not being racist is not enough. One must be anti-racist, a term famously used in the book, quote, How to Be an Anti-Racist, unquote, suggested reading by Cornell University's President Martha Pollack. So you got to be an anti. And by the way, as Black Lives Matter has pointed out, silence is violence. You're either with us or against us. And if you're silent, you're against us, therefore a racist. So you must join us or be labeled a racist. Silence is violence. Black Lives Matter. I'm talking about the organization, Black Lives Matter. As someone pointed out, I forgot who, it was on the radio, if someone says to you, Black Lives Matter, you may respond, all Black Lives Matter, because the organization of Black Lives Matter has no interest in black lives. They only have interest in black lives that are taken by white policemen, or policemen generally now, black policemen included. They're short hairs as well as white policemen. But so if you say all Black Lives Matter, you may include all those people getting shot right now. The borough president of Brooklyn, New York, and Brooklyn is Kings County, is the borough of Brooklyn in New York. A Democrat, a black Democrat, has said, hey, we need to get back the plainclothes anti-crime force that Mayor Bill de Blasio abolished. Murders, shootings are out of control. We need to get them. Too many of my constituents, including black constituents, mostly black constituents, are being shot and killed. What's the violent crime in New York last week was 277% greater than the year before for that week, analogous week. And murders are going sky high. Maybe New York will overtake Colorado for the most murders.
Colorado or Chicago?
I'm sorry, Chicago, not Colorado. I'm thinking about Denver and what may happen there. But, I'm sorry, Chicago. Now, and we all know Chicago has the most murders. Of course, that's mostly confined to the minority areas, particularly black areas. Although they're not the most violent city per 100,000. Violence per 100,000 of population, the leading cities are St. Louis, Detroit, and Baltimore, all of which have cut their budgets for police way back. And of course, in Baltimore and St. Louis, you have all the stand-down orders for police because police have been nasty. I mean, St. Louis was Ferguson. I mean, the policeman defending himself from a thug named Brown who had just robbed a convenience store, who's now lionized as a martyr, and called the Ferguson effect.
This is where I'd like to interrupt and just tell everybody that when you get a chance, like every morning I drive by and there's a cop in the same place checking speed or whatever he does, and I just salute him as I drive by. And sometimes he waves back, sometimes he doesn't. But with that being said, no matter where you are, if you see an officer, police officer, or military personnel in uniform, go up and just say thank you. That's all it takes. Just thank you. And you'll be amazed at the smile that'll come on their face. I did it in the grocery store the other day in my city. And the police officer was just, he was beaming by the time I could get the word thank you, out of my mouth. And, they want to be appreciated. They give up their lives for us. And all it takes from us is a thank you. You got my support. I've got your back. You've got my back. And this goes into the military side of it. But all you have to do is go up and say thank you. If you get an opportunity to buy him a meal, buy him a meal. So, back to you, Robert.
I think you're completely right. And it brings up an incident yesterday. I went to a wedding yesterday, and one of the people at the wedding, I spoke to one of the young women, and she's married to a policeman. And when she told me she was married to a policeman, it's like she didn't want to say it. It's like they've been so attacked and so criticized and so disrespected that she was reluctant to say that her husband was a policeman.
That's a shame. And, I picked up on something today on Fox News. I've been saying it for years because I do it. I ride with the police on occasions. And I think every politician, everybody ought to ride and find out what that cop is up to or what they have to go through on a day-in, day-out basis, whether you ride with them at night, if you got the guts to do that, or you ride with them during the day. And, I've done this ever since I was a reporter for my radio station, or not my radio station, but the radio station I was working with, because I would find out information and enjoyed it and found out what cops do. And I ain't going to be the one crawling in that black building that has been reported as being a robbery going on or a break-in going on. I'm not going to crawl in that window and try to find out what's happening in that building, and I doubt that you would either. So when you start trying to criticize the cops, it's like the old American Indian saying, walk a mile in my moccasins. Find out what the police do, and even at that point you don't have the right to judge.
Well, that's interesting you would bring that up, because my wife is a psychologist, and she worked with the police for years, and she used to go on ride-bys with the police officers. She worked with the police in Delaware, when we lived in Delaware, and she worked with the police down here. So she is very familiar with what they have to go through, and my wife, having worked with the police for years and years, tends to be extremely sympathetic and extremely appreciative of what the police do.
I want to go one step further. Not only saying thank you to the police and put a smile on their face, but as you're doing that, whether it's military, police, or whatever it happens to be that's in uniform, thank them for their service, but also in the back of your mind, God bless their families, because a military person, it may be the man or the woman serving on active duty, but their families are behind them, supporting him. And every day that a cop pins on his badge and goes out, he has to have that family supporting him and wondering, is he going to come back or is she going to come back? And that takes an attitude that I don't know, I couldn't accept. It's like I can't imagine living in Israel with the fact that you don't know when a missile's going to strike again. So think about it, folks. Before you criticize, walk in their shoes.
Well, of course, if you take a look at how many policemen are now retiring early or quitting the force in the major cities like New York, I think the last time I saw that over 700 policemen, and the number is now accelerating. Well, why not? I mean, Bill de Blasio is throwing him under the bus. Well, getting back to this book about how to be an anti-racist that Professor William Jacobson of Cornell talks about, and by the way, you should look up his blog and see what he has to say, because he's standing against a good part of the faculty and a good part of the students that because of his, let's say, correct analysis of the Black Lives Matter movement and the organization. And here's what he said. I've just started reading How to Be an Anti-Racist. Although I haven't finished the book, from the intro chapters, it is clear that compulsory activism is required and race-neutral criteria are rejected. Inaction is considered racist. This review by Coleman Hughes summarizes the thesis. If the book has a core thesis, it is that the war admits of no neutral parties, no ceasefires. For Kendi, there is no such thing as a non-racist idea. Kendi's the author of the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. For Kendi, there is no such thing as a non-racist idea, only racist ideas and anti-racist ideas. His Manichaean outlook extends to policy. Every policy in every institution, in every community, in every nation is producing or sustaining either racial inequity or equity, Kendi proclaims, defining the former as racist policies and the latter as anti-racist. And remember, Black Lives Matter. Silence is violence. You know, this is a statement for a totalitarian state. In a totalitarian state, the idea is to shrink the private sector, increase the public sector, increase public concern. The personal becomes political. Everything, what you say, what you think, who you associate with, what you're allowed to own, what job you're allowed to have, this all now becomes political. Lenin made that plain. Lenin, in ruling on behalf of the proletariat, said it was up to the vanguard, the intellectual vanguard, to decide what's best for each person, because what's best for each person would mean what's best for the state. You had to put the state's interests first, which of course meant that people couldn't change jobs, people couldn't own more than a little piece of personal property. So the idea was everything becomes a question of politics. Everything becomes political, and that's the definition of totalitarian. People think, oh, well, a dictator, that's what they think. Well, eventually the government becomes dictatorial. There is no way for a socialist government not to end up dictatorial. There's no way. Because what's it all based on? A command economy? So you start command. It's what they call it, command economy. So you're commanding people, what they can, companies can form, what they can do, and pretty soon you're commanding people about everything. The famous, and this is in this country. I mean, the answer is going on in this country. We're heading towards what I would call not a purely socialist economy. I don't think that's going to get there. We're going to get to a corporate capitalist economy, where the government decides who gets the money, who gets the support, and what corporations can do. And the big corporations go along. They love it, because what does the government do? It destroys small business. That's Obama administration spent 8 years destroying small business with their regulations and taxes. More small businesses went out of business than were formed. That was reversed in the Trump administration. A lot of good it's going to do Trump if your polls are right. But the point is, the destruction of competition is something that big corporations want. So they support the Democrats and they support regulation. And they don't care about this move towards totalitarianism, because as Saul Alinsky said, the great left-wing strategist, when asked, how come you have so much success in negotiating with these big corporations? And he said, it's easy. I understand that if I promised them a profit today, they would sell me the rope that I could use to hang them tomorrow. That's what he said. And that's exactly what our big corporations are. They're willing to do what's necessary to prevent the Trump administration from blocking them from China, for example. They would just be happy with a global government based on the Chinese model, so they could go on raking in their billions of dollars in profits. There is, and what? Look, the Democrats don't believe it. Don't are not serious when they say, oh, these billionaires. The billionaires are Democrats. The biggest ones, 9 out of 10, the last time I looked. Go ahead and look it up. Billionaires. And that doesn't even include George Soros, because he's sped his money around to so many different foundations that $18 billion the last time, that he's not listed personally anymore in the top 10, but he controls as much money as most of the people in the top 10. Probably $40-50 billion. They're Democrats. So there's no way that the Democrats are ever going to really attack the billionaires, really do anything that they don't like. They may raise taxes here and there, but they'll give them something else, knock out competition, reopen the markets to Iran and to China, particularly to China. So don't believe them. They're just lies. What we're going to have, and the big corporations will support the Democrats in this, we're going to have a corporate capitalist society. Remember, during the Obama administration, the federal government subsidized some 30 or so companies. Green, Solyndra was only one of them. These green companies, the future of American energy, the future of our economy. Everyone, with one exception, dissolved or went one way or another. He sold out to the Chinese, went into bankruptcy, or closed their doors. Solyndra was just the biggest of them, and the taxpayer took a $500 and some odd million loss on Solyndra. What happened in New York with the brilliant Mario Cuomo? They put $750 million into a green factory to make panels, solar panels. It went belly up, $750 million down the tubes. And he spent that money instead of listening to his advisors about getting ready for medical emergencies. So New York was woefully short of PPEs, personal protection equipment, and short of ventilators and anything else, because Mario Cuomo spent all the money, with, of course, his Democratic legislature, on these frivolous green projects. And we're about to see how much those green projects are going to wreck the country, because they will. There's no energy makes the country go. There is no so-called green energy that's more efficient than natural gas and low-cost oil and coal. And if you think the trade-off necessarily is less pollution, I just point out to you that those electric cars, they got to be charged up. And where do they get their electricity from? We're up to a heartbreak.
Quick Stakes, that's Q-U-I-K Stakes, are not just for surveyors. They are great for family and community gardens. Go online to www.quickstake.com or contact your local land surveying supply dealer and get you a box of Quick Stakes. You'll love them every year when you plant your garden. Again, that's Quick Stakes, Q-U-I-K Stakes, the truly preferred way to stake and identify what's in your garden now.
This is David Donaldson with the Atlanta Healing Center, conveniently located in Lawrenceville, Georgia. At AHC, your success is our goal. Addiction recovery is about more than just not using. It's about becoming a whole person and addressing all aspects of your physical, psychological, and social needs. Please call us at 770-696-9862, or you can reach us on the web at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
Whether cruising the strip in a 57 Chevy or taking the family on a vacation in a 71 Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser, you need to tune in to Classic Cars with Steve Ronaldo and Jim Weber every Saturday from 8 to 9 a.m. on americaswebradio.com.
This is America's Web Radio. Would you like to have a show, talk about your business, or express your opinion on America's Web Radio? Just email gm@americaswebradio.com and we'll get back to you. Thank you.
This is Professor Robert D'Agostino back with Do Facts Matter? And increasingly, they don't matter at all. So go back to what Professor William Jacobson was talking about and what's really happening. And we have an obsessive focus on race right now, the color of one's skin. That is, I guess that gets us away from the focus on transsexuals for a while. But anyway, we're and what's that combined with? Elise Cornell is telling us it's a requirement of activism, and that's going to be the future. Obsessive focus on race and a requirement of activism. No silence. Silence is violence, as Black Lives Matter says. So, and that means everything becomes a question of politics. Everything comes subject to the public requirements, public regulation. And we see now, we thought that the left was targeting the Second Amendment, which of course it does. The idiot mayor of Chicago says the solution to violent crime in Chicago is more gun control. Well, Chicago has the toughest gun control regulations in the country. So what's more gun control going to do? Take more guns away from people who are defending themselves? It certainly isn't going to take guns away from the criminals. They don't buy their guns at gun shows. That's ridiculous. They don't buy their guns from retailers. They buy their guns on the street. You can go to street in certain parts of Atlanta, and if you look right and you're dressed right and you ask the right person, you can buy a gun. Now, some of the revolvers you can buy are pretty cheap and don't work all that well, thank goodness. So when the criminals buy them, they don't necessarily, when they pull the trigger, they don't necessarily kill somebody. The bullet may not come out. But criminals have no trouble getting guns. They're imported, illegally imported from other countries. They're illegally made. They're stolen, and then they're sold on the streets. So these criminals, they don't buy their guns at gun shows. They don't buy their guns from gun retailers. So Mayor Lightfoot over there in Chicago, well, we're going to control the violence in Chicago by having more gun control laws. To what end? I suppose you can say that if every single gun in the country could be confiscated, it would be wonderful. But it can't. It can't. No matter what happens, it can't. Because the criminals won't give up their guns. And some years ago, I think it was Australia, had a gun buyback thing, and they were so happy about all these guns were being turned in and people were getting money for the guns. They were buying the guns back. And guess what happened? Gun sales rose incredibly. Everyone who sold their old guns went out and bought a new gun. Oh, people are not perfectible, despite what the left thinks. New man. We're going to have new man. And let me tell you how bad it is. This is Cornell, what the Professor Pollack, President Pollack has suggested, and Martha Pollack has suggested in Cornell, that she's recommended the creation and implementation of a 4-credit education requirement on racism, bias, and equity for all Cornell students. So a 4-credit course of political indoctrination or left-wing Marxist-Leninist indoctrination. A systemic review of the curriculum in each of our colleges and schools to ensure that courses reflect, represent, and include the contributions of all people. Several college schools and departments already have done this. Well, sure. Now, are you going to go to the math department? Now, there's a lot of reasons why European science moved ahead of other sciences. And we got Newtonian physics and Einsteinian physics. Some of it's related to climate. If you're in a climate where food is easy to come by, either you hunter-gatherer or grow it or pick it off trees or what have you, there's not so much of an incentive to figure out how to live better because you're living pretty well. But you go to a colder climate. Remember, everybody came out of Africa. I mean, if the evolutionists are right, then humanity originated in Africa and spread from Africa all over the world. Well, if you spread into Northern Europe, you better figure out how to do things. You develop clothing. You develop hunting stuff. Then you want to get better hunting weapons. So you got one thing leads to another. So, I don't know how you balance every college of engineering, biology, I mean, life sciences, math, physics may be harder to do. Amplification of Cornell's existing scholarship on anti-racism and the creation of an anti-racism center that further strengthens our research and education on systems and structures that perpetuate racism. Sounds wonderful, doesn't it? And let's see, what's the end? And inequality, I should have known that was the end. And on policies and interventions that break that cycle. And of course, all faculty would be expected to participate in this programming and follow-on discussion in their departments. Development to ensure understanding, development of a new set of programs focusing on the history of race, racism, and colonialism in the United States, designed to ensure understanding of how inherited social and historical forces have shaped our society today and how they affect interaction inside and outside of our classrooms. The commitment to real change is the responsibility of all, particularly those of us in the majority communities. It is our responsibility to read, reflect, learn, listen, and then change the system that has disadvantaged our Black, Indigenous, and other colleagues. Well, you know what we need to do? We need to go back and just figure out how the Great Society and the war on poverty destroyed low-income families. And that's mostly minority families in this country. In the 1950s, post-World War II area, in the 1950s up to the very early part of the 60s, Black families were intact. Only 11% of Black kids were raised in single-family homes. Only 25% were born to single mothers. Then the community pressured a lot of those fathers to get married, take care of their own kids. But Great Society, as one person said, married Black women with children to the government, relieving men of their responsibilities. Relieving men of responsibilities is always kind of dangerous. As somebody said, and I mentioned this before, I think on the show, some French philosopher, I got to look this one up, said, civilization was invented by men to impress women. Well, if women were not concerned about being taken care of anymore because the government did it, and men were able to, let's say, avoid their responsibilities, well, why not avoid them? So when we reflect on what we've done wrong, the enemy of the blacks are essentially white liberals. They're the ones who thought up the Great Society. And the interesting thing about the Great Society and war on poverty is Lyndon Johnson, who signed off on all this, knew it was a mistake. But he was so intimidated by all these Kennedy advisors from Harvard that he had kept over after the Kennedy assassination that he did it anyway. And he knew it wouldn't work. And we want to do more of the same, but have reparations, throw more money so they don't, the welfare reform under Clinton and Bush worked. Took a lot of people off welfare, kept a lot of daddies working for their kids, combined with policies that increased policing. If we were really concerned about all Black lives, we'd be insisting on more policing, more funding, more stop and frisk. How many thousands of young Black males were saved in New York because of the policies of Rudy Giuliani and then Blumenthal? How many? Bloomberg, excuse me. Keep calling Blumenthal. That's the senator from Connecticut. Bloomberg. How many? Take a look at the figures. The number of murders in New York before Giuliani became mayor. 3,000 a year. The number of murders when Bloomberg left the mayor down to 300 a year, 1/10. How many thousands of lives? What's happening in New York now under the Bill Comrade, as they call him, Bill de Blasio? And of course, Bill de Blasio was, at least in one part of his career, a admitted communist, but he is wrecking New York as we speak. That's it for today, and I hope you took this seriously. Organizing for America, look it up. They're behind the organization of what's going on, directly and indirectly.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
The Docs for Patient Care Foundation is your way to join the fight and become a member of an organization created by doctors for patients dedicated to fighting for your healthcare freedom and preserving the doctor-patient relationship. Get a pen and paper. Write down www.docsforpatientcarefoundation.org. That's www.docsforpatientcarefoundation.org. Go to our site and please make a generous tax-deductible donation and join the fight today. Thank you.
You can keep your doctor, you can keep your plan, and every family will save thousands of